Longman Brewery, Old Man.
Life is too short to be drinking shitty beer.
Welcome to another edition of Bands, Bikes and Booze Reviews. First review in a while. Been really busy doing recording and other such nonsense. But I've come back with this one. And this is the Longman Old Ale from Longman Brewery, based in East Sussex. Now, little story behind this. I was in Tunbridge Wells the other day. I was giving the daughter a lift to a job interview, and while she was in the interview I decided to reconnoitre the area, and I bumped into Noble Wines, I think they were called. Yeah, Noble Wines. And I saw the shop from a distance and the sign up at a bottle of wine and all that, and I just thought, that's a fucking hole. I'm going to avoid it. But as I walked past, I see some beer in the window. And I see this caught my eye. It was the Longman Brewery Old Man. And sat beside it was a bottle of Longman Best Bitter. Now, I tried the Longman Best Bitter about a month ago. Went out for dinner with the missus one lunchtime, Sunday lunchtime. And she was driving, so I decided to investigate the local beer. This was in a pub in Kent, and they had that Longman Best Bitter. And I thought I'll give that a go, and I'm so glad I did, because it was absolutely amazing stuff. One of the best bitters I've tasted in a long time. And it was on cask, and it was kept quite well, so it was quite a pleasant experience going in there and just finding a random beer. I love when that happens, when you walk into a pub, you find a random beer, you get a pint of it, and it's absolutely amazing. And that's what the Longman Best Bitter was. So I bought a bottle of that as well. Review will be coming up soon, but I've decided to do the Old Ale first. Now, I've not tried any of their beers aside from the Best Bitter, but if the Old Ale is as good as the Best Bitter, then this is going to be an absolute stormer. Now, as I say, I got it from Tunbridge Wells, Noble Wines. Quite a decent shop, actually. They had some good beers in this, all local beers, like from East Sussex and Kent as well. They had quite a few old dairy beers in there. Had a lot of crap in there as well, the usual caper. But I did get another beer from them as well. The Estonian beer in the funny bottle, whose name escapes me at the moment, but I did try some of their lager and it was really nice. It had a very, very subtle Belgian twist on it. But what I've got from them now is a Belgian white IPA, which is, again, interesting. So I do want to check that out. So I've got that in the fridge, ready to go as well. But as I say, today is all about the Old Ale. Now, this is the Longman Brewery. As I say, they're based in East Sussex. But if you look at the label, that's where they get their name from. That, if you've not seen it, that is the Old Man engraving on the side of a hill, which is apparently the largest depiction of a human form and oldest as well in existence in Europe, certainly. And they say it dates back to possibly the Neolithic times, possibly the Iron Age. However, archaeological evidence would suggest that this is probably actually dating back from the 15th century or early modern era, as it's known. But needless to say, that is carved onto the side of a hill, and it's quite well known. It's not the same one that you're thinking of down in Dorset, the fellow with a big hard on and all that. It's not that, it's bigger than that. But that is where the brewery gets its name, and the brewery is not too far. It's based on a farm, Church Farm. And they do their own malt as well, and I'm assuming that's what's gone into this, because there is a Church Farm malt, and that is local to them. So again, something I really like is the fact that this has got local ingredients on it. I won't go too much into the ingredients on here, I'll do that in the next section. But just in case you're not familiar with the style, and I haven't bored the shit out of you talking about Old Ale, but Old Ale was the original beer. It was how beer was served up in the 18th century, before the advent of, or before the popularity of hoppy beers. and it was basically all about the malt. It was a dark beer. It would be brewed in a brewery and sent immediately to the inns and the pubs, and the innkeeper or landlord would let that mature on his premises, and he would serve it up as he saw fit. And you would be able to blend them as well. I've gone over this so many times in videos. If you want a bit of an insight into it and a bit more in-depth explanation, then look at the history of IPAs, because basically IPAs upstaged old ale, but it is making a comeback, and there are some really good old ales out there. If you've seen my recent review of Broadside, Adnams Broadside, and the Old Peculiar, they're two really good examples of old ale, or the old ale style. Barley wine could be sort of categorised in that it's a very strong old ale, and I reviewed quite a few barley wines on the channel. It's also taking off in America as well, and the craft brewers are starting to, or they have been brewing old ale now for quite some time. And I was reading the other day, going off topic slightly, I was reading the other day that American brewers have started doing mild now as well. They've started brewing mild, which I have mixed feelings about, because if it's mild brewed with American hops, then it isn't mild. Stop calling it mild. The cynic in me thinks they're going to call it a mild IPA, which is going to fucking send me into Hitler-esque rants. But anyway, let's stop there. Let's get on to the next section. This is a 500ml bottle. It is 4.3%. Old ale is normally a little bit stronger, but modern old ale, if there's such a term, bit of an oxymoron there, but modern old ale, it has been known to be under 4%, and anything above. This is 4.3, so reasonably sessionable. Same ABV as Guinness, and it, for all intents and purposes, it could be a session old ale. Now, that's won quite a few awards. It's won 13 it's won 13 awards, among them Siebert Gold Awards as well, which is no mean feat. And the awards that it's won are just gold and silver, so it has got some reputation as being good. I only hope that it is good and it's not a duff bottle or a duff batch, or maybe just hyped up to give it them awards. But as I say, they use their own Church Farm pale malt, which is the base malt in there. They also use brown malt and chocolate malt, which are more or less self-explanatory. Brown malt gives it its nice colour, makes up the grain bill. I think there's wheat in that as well. They've also put chocolate malt in, and again, chocolate malt, self-explanatory, gives it a nice chocolatey flavour. The hops in here, there's two types. There's Fuggles and there's Bramling Cross, two traditional English style hops, very popular with the dark beers of the English style. So, example, old ale being a prime example. The best bitters, of course, would use Bramling Cross. I think Fuggles is probably arguably one of the most popular styles of English hop. You could say maybe Goldings were as well, but Fuggles, of course, are used widespread in a lot of the English style beers. Hops, though, are traditionally not the main thing that went into old ale. Old ale was all about the malt. It was only afterwards that the addition of hops and the bitterness, people started to like that flavour, hence the reason IPAs and, of course, the Napoleonic Wars meant that the wheat or the malt was used for other things, so the malt bill would be significantly reduced. I don't know what's wrong with me. I've not had a beer. I can hardly get my fucking words out. Let's put that right. Let's get this beer open. Righto, this has been stood for a while here. It is about cellar temperature. It's come out the fridge. Room's quite warm, got the heating on. It is fucking taters out there. Went to Norfolk yesterday, to Great Yarmouth. They had the Circus of Horrors. If you ever get a chance to go and see that, that is absolutely amazing. It's like a gothic horror circus. Brilliant. I love it all. I mean, it may not be to everyone's taste, but there's lots of things like sword swallowers, circus acts. Honestly, some of the girls that were there as well, Jesus Christ, what they were doing was absolutely amazing. Some of the stunts they were pulling, not for me, it was making me feel sick. I was up at heights with no safety net as well. But yeah, definitely worth checking out that. There it is in the glass. The head's a little bit big, that's going to dissipate in a while. But already, oh my good God, that just smells of earth, chocolate, huge chocolate, almost like a stout. And what's doing me, there's a smokiness to it, which I can only compare to the Schlenkerla smoke beer. But it's got almost like that smoky bacon type aroma. And I'm assuming this is coming from the roasted malts that have gone into this. They do say there's a bit of a coffee and molasses flavour to this, but as an old ale goes, this is smelling more like a stout. But I am getting that strong roasted bacon type malt that you get in the Schlenkerla beers, which, to be honest, is not a bad thing. Don't think this is bottle conditioned, it doesn't say on the side. It says it's more bitter than sweet. Well, old ale really isn't like that. Old ale was more about the malt. I suppose if you did get roasted malt in old ale, it would have given it some bitterness to it. But this smells interesting, and it's got that lovely earthy Bramlin Cross and roasted malt mix, which just smells of pure earth, and that's lovely. Really nice. There's some coffee there as well, very faint coffee. So anyway, let's get it down the hatch. Bottoms up. Oh, yeah, that's quite bitter. It's like bitter coffee, earthiness, and big dark chocolate and coffee finish on it as well. Cynic in me thinks, have they put coffee in here? I do hope not. I imagine that's the roasted malt that's giving it that. Well, it is. It would be roasted malt, because I'm getting that smokiness. I wonder what they use to roast the malt with. If they've used wood, then maybe that would explain that smoky bacon, Schlenkerla-esque type aroma. But it's nice. It's quite nice. I'm not sure whether this is more of a, well, it's not a mild, because the flavours are big on this. In fact, the flavours are huge. And I'm thinking whether this was a stout that went wrong and they decided to call it old ale, because it does remind me a hell of a lot of a stout. It makes mention of molasses on the side of it. Not getting that at all. This is just a big explosion of dark chocolate, coffee, some earthy notes that come from the hops, but everything about this, the finish, it's bitter, coffee, dark chocolate, that type of thing. Slightly disappointing, because I was hoping for something like the old ale in the vein of Broadside, Old Peculiar, where there's a little bit more of the invert sugar or brewing sugar in the mix there as well, which would be a little bit more in keeping with the style. But it ain't bad as a standalone beer. This isn't bad at all. Now, for the ABV 4.3 and its appearance, you couldn't really argue that it's a mild because the flavours are just too big for that. If the flavours were a little bit toned down, then that would be a really good mild, but they're not. The flavours are huge on this, but again, it's the malt that's coming through there, just the roasted malt and the coffee. And they're the two dominant flavours really. There's subtle flavours under there, but they are really subtle, like earthiness and that type of thing. Not bad. Body is slightly weak, even though it does contain wheat, which should give the body a little bit more depth to it, but a little disappointing, because whenever I see someone who's brewed old ale and they make a point of saying this is old ale, I'm always fascinated to try it. And I bought that on the strength of their best beer, and that was outstanding on cask. It really was a fantastic pint. But this to me is a little bit of I'd say a little bit of a letdown. I think the roasted malt on there is just a little bit too strong, and it's moving it over to the porter and stout type genre rather than old ale. I'd expect a lot more sweetness on this, maybe some more bigger malt on there as well. But as it goes, it's not a bad beer. I couldn't session this, put it that way. It's a little bit too intense for that. But not bad. I could drink a couple of bottles of that quite easily. Wasn't cheap though. That was £3.90. It's £3.90. I'm lying to you. It's £2.90. So almost £3. Would you get better for £3? As our American cousins would say, hell yes. Adnams Broadside and Old Peculiar for starters. Then you got your 1698 and your 1845. Bigger breweries, I know, but I just think this is a little bit too much on the roasted malt coffee type flavours. So what is the verdict on Longman Brewery Old Man? Well, considering their best bitter was absolutely outstanding on cask, this to me is a little bit of a letdown. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad beer. For all intents and purposes, it's quite drinkable. For me though, personally, just for my taste, I would probably maybe do the 1 or 2, because that bitterness coming from the coffee and that dark chocolate, it's a little bit too much for me after sort of 2 or 3 pints. The aromas were really promising. They did give off some of that Schlenkerla smoky bacon type aroma that you get from their beer, and that intrigued me as well, but it hasn't really lived up to that. This is more of a pseudo porter, maybe a little bit too strong to be a mild, but it could have done with a little bit of sweetness or just toning down that big bitter finish on the end. But it ain't bad, I will say that. I'll give it a 6.5 out of 10. And I was toying with the idea of 7, but I think because you've gone and called it old ale, it just doesn't really fit into what I think as an old ale. I think this is just, as I say, just a little bit too much emphasis on that roasted malt. But it ain't bad. I mean, if you're around the area of East Sussex or Sussex and Kent, you may be able to get hold of this. Up north, I think you're probably going to have to order it online. Is it worth ordering online? If you desperately have to try this, then fill your boots. But to be honest, I wouldn't recommend getting this online, getting a full crate of it, because I don't know, you would probably only do, or personally I would probably only do maybe 1 or 2 of a night time, and that'd be it. I couldn't drink much more. So I think 6.5 out of 10 is a fair mark. Not too bad, but just falls short on a couple of the characteristics I would put with old ale. But there you go. And remember, beer is working class champagne.